Eleanor, now 83, sat quietly in her cherished living room, a sanctuary layered with decades of memories. The soft glow of late afternoon sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, casting gentle patterns over shelves lined with well-worn books and framed photographs. Her delicate fingers traced the edge of a dusty, battered box labeled Memories, its surface scratched from years of silent reverence. As she reached for it, her hands trembled slightly, an unspoken tremor of anticipation and trepidation. She paused, her gaze lingering on a faded photograph pinned to the wall. A young girl with wide, searching eyes, caught in a candid moment of innocence. A soft sigh escaped her lips before she gently opened the box. Inside, layers of yellowed, letters, a tattered journal, and a few faded keepsakes told stories of days long gone, days filled with shadows darker than the present could ever know. Eleanor's breath hitched as she carefully removed the journal, its leather cover cracked but still sturdy, and she ran her fingertips over the pages, feeling the textured impressions of her own handwriting. Her mind flooded with memories, whispered, voices, the clang of distant bombs, the oppressive silence of nights filled with fear, and the quiet suffering behind closed doors. Her eyes clouded with emotion as she remembered her childhood during the chaos of World War II. "I was just a girl then," she murmured softly, voice thick with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. She closed her eyes for a moment, hearing the faint echoes of her past, the muffled sobs, the creak of her father's footsteps, the passive indifference of her mother. The air grew heavy with unspoken stories she had carried for more than 8 decades. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked at the journal as if it held the key to her long-buried truths. "It's time," she whispered aloud, voice trembling but resolute. With a delicate but determined motion, she began to read aloud from her own words, her voice soft, yet carrying the weight of every silent scream, every moment of helplessness, and the flicker of defiance that had sparked her one brave attempt to fight back so many years ago. As she spoke, her eyes flickered with a mixture of vulnerability and a newfound strength, an unspoken promise that her story, once silenced, would now be heard. The room seemed to hold its breath, embracing her courage as she unfolded the layers of her history, each word a step toward healing, each memory a testament to her resilience. And in that quiet space filled with relics of the past, Eleanor finally began to reclaim her voice, knowing that her story was not just her past. It was her power, her legacy, her silent scream turned triumphant song. She gently lifted the fragile, worn diary from the cluttered antique shelf, its leather cover cracked and faded with time. Her fingertips trembled as she traced the delicate yellowed handwriting on the cover. Her own youthful scrawl, a voice long silenced. The scent of aged paper and faded ink filled the quiet room, a scent that carried memories as heavy as the silence she had kept for decades. She hesitated for a moment, eyes glistening with unshed tears, then slowly opened the cover. The first page revealed her childhood words, hurriedly written in a trembling hand, her desperate attempt to hold on to her truth amid chaos and fear. As she turned the pages, a rush of vivid images flooded her mind. The sharp, biting cold of war-torn days, the distant echo of sirens piercing through broken windows, the flickering candlelight in her small, crumbling room where shadows danced ominously on the walls. Her breath hitched as she recalled her father's harsh voice, the way he'd tower over her with clenched fists and dark, angry eyes. His words like stones hurled in a storm. "Be quiet, girl. Don't make a noise, or you'll regret it." She remembered her mother's passive eyes, her lips pressed into a thin line, offering no refuge or solace, just silent complicity that made her feel invisible. With trembling fingers, she traced the inked lines, the words whispering stories of fear, shame and helplessness, memories she had buried deep beneath layers of silence. Now, as she sat alone in her dimly lit living room, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "It's time to tell it." Her voice quivering, yet edged with a newfound resolve. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of vulnerability and defiance as she clutched the diary close to her chest. She knew that her story, her truth, was bound in these faded pages, waiting patiently to be spoken aloud. With a deep, steadying breath, she prepared herself to read, to finally give voice to the years of suffering hidden behind her calm exterior. Each word she read aloud would be a small rebellion against the silence that had defined her life, a step toward reclaiming her voice and her dignity. As her lips parted and her voice emerged, fragile but unwavering, her surroundings seemed to hold their breath in reverence, waiting for the moment when her long-suppressed pain would transform into a powerful testament of survival. Sitting quietly, in her well-worn armchair, Eleanor gently strokes the soft fur of her aging cat, a quiet smile playing on her lips as she gazes out the window at the peaceful garden she cultivated over decades. Her voice, calm and soothing, begins to weave a story, one she's told herself many times before, yet never aloud until now. "You know, sweetheart," she whispers, voice barely above a murmur, "life has a way of hiding shadows behind the brightest moments." Her eyes drift inward, memories flickering like shadows at the edge of her mind. Images of a war-torn childhood, dark and relentless, where fear was an uninvited guest from dawn to dusk. She remembers her father's cruel hands, how they would reach for her in the dead of night, relentless in their violence, while her mother turned away, eyes vacant, voice silent. "It was like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from," she continues softly, fingers absent-mindedly tracing a scar on her wrist, a ghost of her past. Her breath catches for a moment as flashes of that dark time surge forward, her trembling body pressed against cold walls, her father's sneer echoing in her ears, the taste of tears she swallowed to keep silent. Yet her voice gains strength, a small but vital act of rebellion. "I remember one night, I decided enough was enough, even if I didn't know how to fight back then. I remember sneaking past shadows, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, and slipping out the door while the house was silent, trying to find a way to escape the nightmare that was my life." Her hand trembles slightly, but her gaze remains, steady, as if confronting those memories again grants her some measure of control. "That night, I ran. Not away from the house, but toward something I didn't quite understand then. Freedom. I found a quiet alley, hidden from the world. And for a moment I felt alive, like I'd broken a chain, even if just for a heartbeat." Her voice softens further, almost as if sharing her story aloud is a secret only her cat and she understand. Now, years later, I sit here, in this cozy chair, and I tell you all of it, so that maybe, someday, someone will listen and see that even in the darkest shadows, there's a spark of resilience. That no matter how battered and broken we feel, there's a strength inside us waiting to shine through, if only we dare to speak it out loud. She pauses, eyes shimmering with quiet tears, but a sense of peace washing over her as she leans back, feeling the weight of her past lighten just a little, knowing her story, her fight, has finally begun to find voice. Eleanor's gaze drifted softly to the doorway, as her granddaughter's curious voice pulled her back from the distant shadows of memory. The girl's wide, innocent eyes shimmered, with genuine wonder, clutching the old, worn diary Eleanor had kept so many years ago, a fragile artifact of her childhood. "Grandma?" the girl asked, her voice small yet eager. "What was it like when you were a girl during the war?" Eleanor paused, her fingers brushing the edge of the diary, as if anchoring herself to the present. She took a slow breath, the weight of decades pressing into her chest, and then her voice, soft but unwavering, began to unfold. She saw the girl's face illuminated by the warm glow of the living room lamp, her tiny hands clutching her knees in anticipation. Eleanor's eyes flickered with a mixture of nostalgia and pain, memories rushing back like a flood. Her childhood house shrouded in a haze of dust and shadows, the distant sounds of bombs echoing through the night sky, the cold of her father's cruel hands, and her mother's hollow silence that seemed to swallow every plea for help. She remembered the nights when she would hide beneath the broken table, trembling, ears strained for any sound of her father's footsteps, her small body pressed against the peeling wallpaper, trying to disappear into the shadows of her own fear. In her mind, she saw herself as a fragile child desperately grasping at scraps of hope, clutching a worn-out doll, the only semblance of comfort amid chaos. It was a time when everything was broken, she finally whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her past. There were nights so dark I couldn't tell if I was alive or just a ghost wandering inside my own home. She looked into her granddaughter's wide eyes, knowing that her words were stirring something deep within her. The war wasn't just out there in the world, she added, voice thick with emotion. It was inside my house, inside my heart, every day. My father was harsh and unpredictable, like a storm that never passed. And my mother. She loved us, I think, but she was helpless, unable to change what was happening. I remember feeling so small, so powerless, yet somehow I found a flicker of strength, something I didn't realize I had until that night I decided to fight back. Eleanor's voice softened further, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I was only 10, maybe 11, when I finally decided I couldn't live under his shadow anymore. I remember going to that crumbling back door, trembling with fear but fueled by a tiny voice inside that told me I had to try. I slipped into the alley, clutching my ragged coat around me, and ran as fast as I could, away from the house, away from the violence, towards something I didn't fully understand then. Freedom. It was a moment so simple yet so profound. I felt alive, standing there in the cold night, a little girl who had just broken free. I didn't know what awaited me outside, but I knew I couldn't go back. That night I ran not just to escape the pain, but towards a promise I made to myself, to survive, to endure, to find a way to heal. Her voice caught, but she continued. And I did. It wasn't easy, and I carried those scars all my life. But that act of resistance, the moment I dared to fight, became the cornerstone of my strength. Now I look at you, and I see a different world, a different life. But I want you to remember that even when darkness seems endless, there's a spark inside each of us waiting to ignite. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to face it and move forward. That's the story I want to pass on. So that someday, if you find yourself in a storm, you'll remember the girl who ran for her life and found her strength in the shadows. Eleanor's voice trailed into a gentle silence, her eyes shimmering, with tears that finally spilled over, blending with the wisdom of a life hard-earned but fiercely owned. Eleanor paused, her hand trembling slightly as she traced the rim of her teacup, the familiar warmth of the porcelain grounding her in the present. The room was thick with silence, the afternoon light casting long shadows across shelves lined with books and photographs, each one whispering stories of a life well lived. She looked into her granddaughter's wide, curious eyes, the innocence, unmarred by the scars of the past, and felt a surge of both love and vulnerability. Slowly she took a deep breath, her chest rising with a mixture of fear and resolve. "There's something I've never told anyone," she whispered, voice barely above a breath, but steady with the weight of decades. "It's about my childhood, what I endured during the war, the nights I thought I wouldn't see dawn again. When I was your age, I thought I was alone, trapped in a world of shadows painted by my father's fists and my mother's silence. I remember the cold nights when I would hide under the old wooden table in our cramped kitchen, trembling as screams echoed outside, feeling helpless, small, and invisible. But I also remember the day I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore." She paused, voice thickening with emotion. "It was a day when I found a crack in my fear, a moment when I realized that fighting back, even just a little, could change everything. I chose to run, not just from that house, but from the shame, the helplessness, the silence that had kept me chained. I ran into the dark streets, barefoot and trembling, and kept going until I found a safe place, a moment where I could breathe and begin to reclaim myself. That act, my breaking free, wasn't just a flight from pain. It was my first step toward survival, toward forging a strength that no one could take away. I want you to know this because resilience isn't born from a life without scars. It's born from facing those scars head-on, from daring to stand up when everything inside screams to stay still. That day I promised myself I'd survive, no matter how broken I felt, and I carried that promise through every hardship that followed. Even now, in this quiet moment, I feel the ghosts of my past whispering, reminding me of the courage it took to finally speak. And I want you to remember, your voice is powerful. Your strength is real. The shadows of yesterday don't define your tomorrow unless you let them. I hope one day you'll find the courage to tell your story, just like I did, because only when we face our darkness can we truly find the light. Eleanor's voice faltered then, tears shimmering in her eyes, but her gaze remained steady, fierce with the knowledge that her silence had broken at last, not just for herself, but for the future she hoped her words would ignite. Sitting at her writing desk, Eleanor stared at the blank page in front of her, a faint tremor passing through her fingers as she reached for her pen. The room was quiet, but for the soft rustle of paper and the distant hum of the evening breeze brushing through the open window. Her eyes, weathered but sharp, flicked over the empty space, and with a slow, deliberate breath, she whispered aloud, "It's time to tell my story. No more hiding behind shadows." Her voice was steady, yet beneath it, ripples of emotion threatened to surface. She clutched her pen tightly, feeling the roughness of its carved wood. A relic from her childhood, a silent witness to her pain and her strength. As her hand hovered above the paper, she closed her eyes briefly, recalling the dark memories, the rough hands grabbing her, the cold words of her father echoing through her mind, the helplessness that had cocooned her every day like a suffocating shroud. She remembered the nights she'd lie awake, trembling under her threadbare blanket, praying for a miracle, pleading silently for the chaos to end. Her mother's silent presence, a figure of indifference or perhaps helplessness, haunted her, still, as if her silence had become a part of her DNA. Now, faced with this moment of raw vulnerability, Eleanor felt a flicker of defiance ignite within her. She whispered again, "I won't let this be my ghost anymore." Her voice cracked slightly, but her resolve hardened. She pressed the pen to the paper and began to write, her words flowing like a gentle but relentless stream. "I remember the day I decided I'd fight back. It was the moment I realized I could no longer be a prisoner of my own fear. Her hand moved swiftly, guided by the swell of memories, her small fists clenched, fighting against the chains of silence that had bound her for decades. Each word was a small act of rebellion, a declaration that her story belonged to her now, not to the shadows of her past. She paused, her brow furrowing as the vivid images of her childhood flickered behind her eyelids. Her father's rage, the fleeting moments when she'd try to run, the sense of being trapped in a world that refused to see her pain. Today, I reclaim my voice, she continued softly, her voice thick with emotion. It's not just for me, but for every girl who's been told to stay quiet, every child whose screams have been swallowed by the silence of a world too busy to listen. I remember how I used to hide in the garden behind the house, clutching a broken mirror, looking into its fractured reflection and wishing I could see myself whole again. That image is still with me, a reminder of the pieces I've had to put back together over a lifetime. The words felt like a balm, healing the wounds she had carried in silence for so long. Her hand trembled as she wrote, but her voice grew stronger with each sentence, more determined. I fought to escape that darkness, not with fists or violence, but with the courage to speak, to reveal what I'd kept buried for so many years. Today I am finally free, free to tell my truth, free to stand tall in spite of everything. As she finished her paragraph, Eleanor leaned back slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile ghosting her lips. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away fiercely. She looked at her words. Her silent confession turned into a powerful testament, and knew that her journey was far from over. This act of writing was her first step toward rewriting her story. Not as a victim, but as a survivor, a woman whose strength had been forged in the crucible of pain. She whispered one last time, "This is my coming out of the shadows." And with newfound conviction, she reached for her glass of water, her hands steady now, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that her voice, once silenced, had finally found its way onto the page. As Eleanor's pen glided across the paper, her mind flooded with vivid memories, each one sharper and more raw than the last. She closed her eyes briefly, and suddenly, she was transported back to that bleak, trembling moment. She could hear the thunder of her father's heavy footsteps pounding down the narrow corridor, an ominous drumbeat echoing through her childhood. The door swung open with a vicious shove, and his face appeared, twisted with rage, eyes blazing. "You're nothing but a burden," he spat, voice rough and low, as he grabbed her arm with bruising strength. Eleanor remembered the way her body instinctively flinched, trying to shrink away from his grasp, her small frame trembling under the force of his fury. She remembered her mother's distant silence, a figure frozen in the background, her eyes vacant and unresponsive, as if her own pain had been swallowed by years of resignation. "Why don't you just shut up, girl?" her father sneered, slamming her onto the worn wooden floor, the rough edge of the table scraping her back as he shouted obscenities. Eleanor's breaths came in ragged gasps, her arms instinctively crossing. To shield herself, her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body was frozen with fear, helpless to stop the storm of violence. Then suddenly, she remembered that one moment when she'd mustered the courage to fight back, her tiny fists trembling, but determined as she pushed against his chest, crying out, "No more! Leave me alone!" Her father's face twisted into a sneer, but her voice echoed in her mind, fierce and unwavering. It was the first crack in her silence, a small act of rebellion that grew into a powerful urge to escape. Yet, even amid her trembling resolve, a voice inside her whispered, "You're too weak, just accept it. Her mother's indifferent stare haunted her still, a silent witness to her suffering, never intervening, never shielding her from the storm. In her mind's eye, she saw herself cowering in the corner of that dark, cold room, tears streaming down her face, feeling utterly abandoned and invisible. That helplessness had been her constant companion, the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders, whispering that she would never break free. But as she now poured her memories onto paper, her hands trembling slightly with the effort, she realized how deep her scars ran, how they had shaped her, yet how they would no longer define her. Her voice, long silenced, was finally rising, from the shadows, daring to be heard. She whispered aloud, "I survived because I refused to let him win," knowing that each detailed recollection was a step toward reclaiming her story, one piece at a time. In the dim, oppressive silence of that cold, barren room, a young Eleanor, no more than 9, cowered behind a heavy wooden door, clutching a tattered doll whose face was worn smooth by trembling fingers. Her small body shivered uncontrollably, not just from the bitter chill that seeped through cracked windows, but from the storm of fear that tore through her insides. Her eyes, wide and glassy, flicked nervously to the thin crack beneath the door, where faint silhouettes of her father's shadow loomed, their distorted shapes a reflection of her twisted reality. Her breath hitched as she whispered to herself, in a voice barely audible, "Someday, I will find strength enough to escape this nightmare." Her tiny hand clutched the doll tighter, her knuckles white, as she pressed her face against the cool wood, trying to block out the muffled sounds of his angry growls and the relentless pounding of her own heart. She imagined a different life, one where she was free, where her voice would echo loudly enough to reach beyond these suffocating walls, where she could stand tall without trembling. The whispered promise was her only anchor amid the chaos, a fragile flicker of hope that refused to die. Her mind raced through visions of running through open fields, of finding shelter in a world that didn't crush her spirit daily, of a future where her innocence would be restored and her scream for freedom finally heard. Her eyes fluttered, closed, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Yet within that quiet moment, a fierce resolve formed, an unyielding vow carved into her young heart. "One day," she vowed softly, "I will break these chains and run so far away that no shadow, no scream, no memory can ever catch me." As she whispered those words into the darkness, a faint glimmer of light sparked in her mind. A spark that would smolder through years of suffering, shaping her into the woman who would someday fight with everything she had, to leave behind her torment and finally step into the dawn of her own strength. Eleanor stood quietly on her porch, the late afternoon sun casting gentle warm hues across her weathered face as she watched her elderly neighbor shuffle slowly from his small, neatly kept house next door. The man, Harold, paused at her gate, his eyes clouded with memories he struggled to contain. Eleanor's heart pounded softly in her chest, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on her. She beckoned him with a tentative hand, and he hesitated before stepping onto her porch, the creak of his joints echoing in the stillness. His voice trembled as he finally broke the silence. "Eleanor, I've wanted to tell you this for years, but I was afraid of what it might do to you. Or what, others would say. I saw him, your father, many times. I knew he was unkind, often violent. I saw him hit you late at night, the way your shoulders would shrink into yourself, trying to hide the tears. I wanted to say something, to stop him, but I was just a boy myself, powerless, paralyzed by fear." I watched everything from behind the curtains, feeling helpless, knowing I should have done more but unable to move. I was afraid that if I spoke, he'd turn his wrath on me or worse, on you. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it wasn't my business, and I kept silent. I thought perhaps if I ignored it, it would pass, that somehow you'd be safe. Harold's voice cracked, and he looked away, ashamed. Eleanor's breath hitched as memories surged, her father's fists pounding, her mother's indifferent gaze, the helplessness that had seeped into her bones, growing darker with each passing year. She fought back tears, clutching her robe, tightly, feeling the sting of years long buried but never fully gone. Slowly she reached out, placing a trembling hand on Harold's. "Thank you for telling me now, after all these years," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "It's not easy to remember, but I needed to hear that, to understand why I felt so alone, why I carried this burden all my life. I was just a child, trying to survive, and you were there, watching, wanting to help, but afraid to break the silence. I've carried that shame, that guilt, long enough. Now I know I'm not alone in this. I've spent my life pretending I was weak, but I've learned that strength is in facing the truth, no matter how painful. Your words have unlocked a part of me I'd buried deep, and I feel the weight starting to lift. It's time I stop hiding behind my silence and finally speak my truth. Not just for myself, but for every girl like I was, longing to be heard and free." Harold nodded slowly, tears shimmering in his eyes as the two of them shared a fragile, silent understanding. An acknowledgement of the past, a step toward healing. In that quiet exchange, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, an affirmation that no matter how long the darkness had lasted, the dawn of her strength was finally rising, ready to dispel the shadows that had haunted her since childhood. Eleanor sat alone in her cozy living room, the afternoon sun casting golden streaks across the worn leather armchair, where she often found herself lost in memories. Her eyes, once sharp with youthful clarity, now shimmered with a quiet intensity as she closed her eyes and let her mind drift to her childhood, an era shrouded in shadows, darker than any storm. She mentally reconstructed the familiar, yet haunting, scenes, the oppressive presence of her father's heavy footsteps echoing down the narrow hall, the sickening clink of metal as he raised his hand, and her mother's indifferent gaze, a silent witness to her suffering. But tonight, Eleanor's breathing grew steady, her mind shifting from mere remembrance to rebellion. With a deep breath, she imagined herself as that young girl again, trembling but refusing to succumb to fear. "No," she whispered aloud, voice trembling but resolute. "Not anymore." In her mind's eye, she saw her father's sneering face as he advanced, but this time she stood her ground, her small fists clenched tight, her voice echoing through the empty corridors of her imagination. "Leave me alone," she shouted, voice gaining strength as she visualized herself pushing back, defying the chains of silence and helplessness. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pictured her body stiffening with courage, her words gaining volume and clarity. "I won't be your victim anymore." Tears blurred her vision in the present, but her mind's eye sharpened the scene, her kicking and pulling free, darting past him into the darkness of an imagined corridor, her breath ragged but victorious. She repeated the act silently. "You can't hold me here," as if the act of mental rebellion could forge a new, unbreakable armor around her spirit. With each imagined strike, she infused her younger self with a surge of resilience, transforming her pain into a symbol of unyielding rebellion. Her mind replayed the scene, now vivid and visceral, a testament to her inner strength. It was a silent scream of defiance, that fierce refusal to be broken, to be silenced. And in that moment, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, as if the act of visualizing her fight had unlocked a part of her long-dormant courage. It was a small but profound victory. The recognition that her true power lay not in the absence of suffering, but in her ability to confront it, to turn her trauma into an enduring symbol of rebellion and resilience. As she opened her eyes, the room felt warmer, lighter. Her resolve quietly solidified. For the first time in decades, she understood that her fight had begun, and she was finally ready to carry that strength into the world beyond her memories. A cold wave of guilt washed over Eleanor as her mind replayed that moment with relentless clarity, dragging her back into the suffocating darkness of her childhood. She sat rigid in her worn armchair, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows that danced across her lined face, and her breath hitched as the vivid memory unfolded before her like a haunting specter. She was just a girl then, trembling in a damp, dimly lit room, clutching a battered cloth doll close to her chest, her heart pounding with a desperate hope that somehow, this time, she might escape. She remembered the sharp, unpredictable anger of her father, how his voice would rise like a storm, shaking the walls, filling her with dread, while her mother's silent indifference seemed to swallow her pleas for help. Eleanor's voice caught as she whispered, "Why didn't I run faster? Why didn't I scream louder?" Her eyes welled with tears she refused to shed, knowing tears would only weaken her. She clenched her fists, trembling, as her mind flashed to that fateful night, her trembling body slipping through the shadows, fingertips brushing the cool metal latch that would have led her to freedom. But then somehow, she'd been caught again. A harsh hand grabbed her by the arm, pulling her back into the abyss. "You're weak." Her internal voice sneered bitterly, echoing the cruel whispers of her childhood, an accusation she'd carried deep inside for decades. Guilt clung to her like a heavy shroud, whispering that her attempt had been futile, that her fight had been nothing more than a child's fragile hope crushed beneath the weight of her circumstances. Her head bowed, trembling as she clutched her knees, the memories assaulting her with relentless intensity, making her question her own strength. How could I have failed? She wondered bitterly, voice trembling with the weight of unspoken shame. I was just a girl. I was so afraid. The room grew silent except for her shallow breaths, but inside a storm raged, an unyielding battle between the ache of regret and the flicker of courage still buried deep within her. She reached out slowly, her trembling, hand brushing the rough fabric of her grandmother's old quilt, seeking comfort in its worn threads, desperately wishing she could undo that moment, rewrite her past with a different ending. Yet in that silent, trembling act, a quiet resolve began to blossom, tiny, fragile, but real. She whispered aloud, almost to herself, I almost made it. I almost escaped. Her voice cracked, fraught with both sorrow and stubborn hope, as she realized that even in her darkest hour, a spark of resilience flickered, stubborn and unbroken, whispering that her fight was never truly over. Sitting alone in her garden, Eleanor gazed across the faded patchwork of blooming roses and tangled ivy, her fingers tracing the rough bark of the ancient oak that had witnessed so many of her silent struggles. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in warm hues of amber and lavender, casting long shadows over her weathered face, each line a testament to decades of pain and resilience. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, lips trembling, as she whispered softly, Was it all for nothing? Did I spend my life fighting shadows that I could never outrun? Her eyes drifted to the small, battered locket she clutched tightly in her palm, an unspoken reminder of innocence lost and hope preserved. Memories surged like turbulent waves, her father's rage echoing in her ears. The nights when she curled into herself, praying for the dawn that never seemed to come. She remembered the moment she had almost run away, fleeing into the darkness, heart pounding with a desperate yearning for freedom. "Why didn't I just go?" she asked the empty air, voice thick with unshed tears. Her fingers tightened around the locket, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Yet, amid the aching silence, a flicker of something unyielding stirred. Perhaps pride, perhaps defiance. She closed her eyes and remembered her young self, trembling but determined, fighting in her mind for every ounce of strength. Maybe my silence was my greatest act of courage, she whispered, voice trembling with a blend of sorrow and fierce resolve. Maybe I've been fighting all along. In my own way, in my own silence. The garden grew darker as shadows lengthened, but Eleanor sat there, rooted in her solitude, contemplating whether her strength had always lay hidden in her quiet endurance, waiting quietly for her to finally recognize that her fight had never truly ended. Eleanor took a slow breath, steadying her trembling hands as she stepped onto the small stage at the community hall. The room fell quiet, the gentle hum of whispered conversations fading into an expectant hush. Her eyes drifted across the faces, eager to listen, and she felt the weight of decades pressing against her chest. Years of silence, pain, and resilience distilled into this single moment. She cleared her throat softly, her voice barely above, a whisper at first, then grew firmer. When I was a little girl, no older than 10, I endured things no child should ever face. My father. He was a harsh, unpredictable man. Violence was his language, and I learned to speak in silence just to survive. I remember hiding in the shadows, praying he wouldn't find me, wishing the darkness would swallow me whole. My mother, she was there, but often absent, lost in her own world, turning her eyes away when I needed her most. I felt invisible, like a ghost drifting through my own life. She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands, fingers trembling as she clutched her locket tightly. One day, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I remember the moment vividly, my small frame trembling, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I thought, this is it. I have to fight. Her voice cracked briefly, but she pressed on. I waited for him to fall asleep, then quietly slipped out of my room, tiptoeing past his snoring figure. I knew the house, the dark, was my only chance. I ran into the night, away from the pain, the fear, the shame. And I kept running until I reached a neighbor's house. That night, I felt something shift inside me. It was as if I tapped into a strength I didn't know I had. Perhaps the only true act of rebellion I ever managed. But it changed everything. Her eyes glistened as she looked out at the listeners, her voice gaining clarity and conviction. I learned that strength isn't about never falling, never breaking. It's about finding a way to rise after you've been shattered. My childhood was a storm I endured with clenched fists and quiet hope. And although the scars are still there, I refuse to let them define me. I stand here today, not as a victim of my past, but as a testament to the resilience that can blossom amid darkness. I want everyone here to know, no matter how heavy the burden, no matter how silent your suffering, there is always a spark within you waiting to ignite. We all have the power to break free, to rewrite our stories, and to find the courage to fight, even when the odds seem insurmountable. As she finished, Eleanor looked around the room, her voice steady and warm, carrying the weight of her lifetime's journey, an unspoken promise that hope could flourish from the depths of despair, and that true strength was born from the quietest acts of defiance. In the dim glow of her living room, Eleanor's eyes softened as she leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly as she began to recount her defining moment of liberation. "I remember that day as if it were etched into my bones," she whispered, voice thick with emotion but steady with resolve. "I was just a girl, no older than 10, trapped in the cold grip of fear, with my father's shadow looming over me, like a dark storm threatening to swallow me whole." Her fingers clenched the armrest of her chair as she closed her eyes briefly, summoning the vivid memory. He was furious that day, more unpredictable than ever. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my entire body trembling, knowing what was coming. But then, something inside me snapped. I realized I couldn't stay frozen in that moment of terror anymore. I looked up at him, eyes blazing with a new kind of fire I hadn't known I possessed. "No," I whispered, voice trembling but unwavering. "Not anymore." With a sudden surge of energy, she mimicked the act, her hands reaching out as if to push him away, her voice rising in a defiant cry. I pushed him back, my small body somehow filled with a strength I never knew I had. "Let me go!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the silent house, surprising even myself. It was as if a storm had erupted inside my soul, breaking loose from its chains. I scrambled to my feet, pushing past him, fighting against his grasp that tried to pull me down. "You can't keep me here anymore," I yelled at the top of my lungs, my words fierce with the hope of freedom. And then, with one desperate burst of energy, I broke free, tearing myself away from his grasp, running, stumbling, but finally escaping into the narrow corridor beyond, where the door was. I remember flinging it open, the cold air hitting my face like a slap and racing into the unknown, out into the world beyond those four walls. I didn't look back, didn't hesitate. That moment of flight was my declaration. I was no longer his prisoner. I was a girl who had fought back, who had found her voice amid the chaos, and who refused to be silenced again. That act of breaking, free of reclaiming my power, became the seed of everything I've become since. Proof that even in the darkest storms, the smallest sparks of courage can ignite a path to liberation. I still see that girl in my mind, trembling but fierce, her eyes blazing with the promise of a future she chose herself, not one dictated by fear or silence. And today, I tell you, her story is my story. It's everyone's story, of resilience, of fighting through despair to find the strength to truly escape. As she finished speaking, Eleanor's voice wavered for a moment, then steadied into a calm, unwavering resolve. Her gaze lingered on her hands, now steady and sure, as if symbolizing her victory over the shadows of her past. In that quiet space, she had reenacted her escape, her body language and words embodying the raw, unbreakable spirit of a girl who refused to stay caged, transforming her pain into a triumphant act of rebellion that would forever echo in her soul. As Eleanor's voice slowly softened, a fragile tremor giving way to a steady, commanding tone, she looked directly into the eyes of her audience, her granddaughter, her friends, perhaps even herself in that quiet moment of reckoning. "You know," she began, her gaze unwavering now, "there was a time I believed I was nothing more than a helpless girl trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I'd spend nights trembling in the dark, feeling the weight of my father's fists, the cold indifference of my mother, and the silence that screamed louder than words. But the truth is, beneath that fear, there was a spark, a tiny ember of defiance I refused to let die out. It was there, buried deep, waiting for the right moment to ignite. Her hands clenched, gently into fists on her lap, a quiet act of rebellion, her voice gaining strength with each word. That moment came when I realized I was tired of hiding, of pretending I was okay. I looked into the mirror one day, eyes sunken, face marked by pain, and I told myself, no more. Not today. Not ever. She paused, her breath catching as memories flooded her mind. I remember the night I decided to fight back. My father was screaming again, his shadows cast across the walls. But instead of shrinking away, I stood up. I clenched my fists and screamed right back, defying him for the first time in my life. It was terrifying. My voice trembling, my heart not hammering in my chest. But it was real. That act of rebellion, small as it seemed, was my first step toward liberation. When I finally ran from that house, I didn't know where I was going, only that I could no longer stay. I ran into the night, the cold air biting my skin, my footsteps pounding in my ears like a drum of defiance. I didn't look back. I knew I'd carry that moment with me forever. Her fight, her voice, her courage. Because it was the act that shattered the chains of silence that had bound me for so long. Her eyes shimmered with the weight of decades, yet sparkled with unyielding resolve. And today I stand here telling you my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor who refused to be silenced again. That girl, trembling but fierce, her voice shaking but unbreakable. That girl is who I am now. I've learned that true strength isn't about never falling, never feeling afraid. It's about rising every time you do, choosing to speak when silence would be easier, daring to fight when surrender seems the only option. Because in those moments of courage, we find the power to rewrite our stories, to turn pain into purpose. I've carried these scars, yes, but I've also carried the unshakable truth that even in the darkest storms, a single spark of resilience can light the way to freedom. As she finished, her voice steadied into a calm, unwavering resolve, and her gaze lingered on her hands, steadier now, alive with the strength born from years of suffering and overcoming. In that quiet space of shared understanding, Eleanor embodied her own narrative, no longer a victim of her past, but a testament to the unbreakable force of resilience. As Eleanor's voice settled into a calm, unwavering tone, she looked out, over the gathered crowd, her eyes shimmering with a mix of vulnerability and fierce determination. "You see?" she began, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "I spent most of my life hiding behind silence, afraid that speaking out would shatter what little peace I'd managed to find. But today, I realized that silence only fed the darkness. It was fear, yes, but also a choice I made to endure rather than fight back. Yet, here I stand, a woman who once believed her voice was lost forever, reminding you that even in the depths of unimaginable pain, there is a spark we can choose to nurture, to ignite into a flame of resilience." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces in front of her, some filled with curiosity, others with silent reflection. "Because I fought not with fists or violence, but with the raw, unyielding strength of my spirit. I remember the nights when I wished I could disappear, swallowed by the shadows of my past. I remember the tears I hid beneath my pillow, the silent screams echoing in my mind, and the helplessness that threatened to drown me. But I refused to let that darkness define me. Instead, I gathered every fragment of courage I could find, hidden deep within my trembling heart, and I fought to break free. Her hands clenched into fists, then relaxed, as if physically releasing the memories that threatened to suffocate her. And I did escape, she continued, voice gaining clarity. Not because I was stronger than those who tried to break me, but because I refused to let their cruelty be the end of my story. Today, I share my truth because I want each of you to know resilience isn't about never falling. It's about rising every time, no matter how many times life drags you down. It's about finding the strength to speak, even when your voice trembles, to stand, even when your legs threatens to give out. My journey wasn't easy, and the scars I carry are proof of that. But they are also testament to the fact that survival is an act of rebellion, a declaration that we are more than the pain inflicted upon us. We are survivors, warriors of our own stories, and if I can do it, so can you. Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion, the silence that followed thick with introspection. Then, slowly, the room erupted into applause. Soft at first, then with growing fervor, each clap a symbol of shared resilience, a collective acknowledgement that pain, no matter how deep, can be transformed into a powerful message of hope. Eleanor's jaw tightened, a gentle smile touching her lips, knowing that her voice had finally found its purpose, resonating far beyond her own scars, lighting a path for others to follow. Returning home, Eleanor steps onto the familiar porch of her modest house, the late afternoon sun casting a warm amber glow across the weathered wood. She pauses, breath steadying as a gentle breeze stirs the air, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from her garden, an aroma that whispers of resilience and new beginnings. Her hand lingers on the rusted doorknob, trembling slightly, not from age, but from a deep, quiet gratitude. For years her past had lurked like shadows in the corners of her mind, threatening to unravel the peace she painstakingly built. But now, with her story finally told, her truth laid bare and embraced, she feels an unshakable sense of liberation washing over her. She pushes the door open, the hinges creaking softly, a familiar sound that echoes her long journey from silence into strength. Inside, everything feels different. The walls seem to breathe, alive with memories but also with the promise of healing. Eleanor moves softly through her tidy living room, her fingertips brushing the spines of books she once cherished. Stories of hope, courage, and salvation. She settles into her favorite armchair, the one she's had for decades, its fabric worn but comforting. Her eyes drift to the photograph on the mantel, a picture of her as a young girl, eyes wide and innocent, before the shadows cast their long darkness. A flicker of a smile touches her lips as she whispers softly, "I've come home at last, not just to this house, but to myself." Her voice, steady and full of quiet power, resonates within the quiet space, a testament to the strength she has forged in the face of unimaginable darkness. Tears threaten to well up, but this time they are tears of relief, of finally merging the fractured pieces of her life into a coherent whole. The scars, once symbols of pain, now shimmer as badges of survival, reminders that she endured, that she fought, and that she triumphed. Sitting back, she looks out the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, feeling a profound sense of peace settle in her heart. Her past no longer haunts her. It is now a chapter she has rewritten, transforming her suffering into a story of resilience and hope. With a gentle smile, Eleanor whispers to the empty room, "I am free," knowing that her journey has come full circle, and she is finally at peace. Her story no longer a tale of victimhood, but a declaration of victory over her own history. Eleanor's days gradually found a new rhythm, one filled with purpose and intentionality that she hadn't known in decades. She began volunteering at community centers, her voice steady yet gentle as she shared her story with groups of eager young women, their eyes wide with curiosity and empathy. Sitting comfortably in a circle of chairs, she looked directly into their faces, her hands resting on her lap, trembling slightly but unwavering. "You know," she started softly, "I've carried my past like a heavy stone in my pocket for most of my life. It weighed me down, made me forget who I truly was. But I've learned that resilience isn't about pretending the pain never existed. It's about finding the courage to face it, acknowledge it, and then decide what comes next." Her voice caught for a moment, but she pressed on, her gaze warming with a quiet strength. "When I was your age, I thought silence was safest. I thought if I kept quiet, the hurt wouldn't find me. But I was wrong. The real strength comes from opening up, from sharing what's buried deep inside, no matter how dark or ugly it seems." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her scarf as if drawing strength from the fabric, then continued. "You don't have to carry your burdens alone. You have the power to rewrite your story, just like I finally did. It's never too late to reclaim your voice and stand tall, even when the past tries to hold you back." Her words resonated in the room, a palpable wave of hope washing over the young women as they listened intently. Eleanor watched their faces light up with understanding, and a sense of fulfillment blossomed within her. Proof that her pain had transformed into a beacon for others, seeking their own liberation. As the session ended, she stayed behind to exchange warm embraces and heartfelt thank yous, feeling a deep connection rooted in shared strength. Walking home that evening, she looked up at the starry sky, her heart swelling with gratitude, knowing her journey had come full circle. Not just as a survivor, but as a healer, inspiring others to find their own light amidst the shadows. Sitting quietly in her favorite chair, Eleanor gently closes her journal, the leather cover soft beneath her fingertips, as she takes a slow, deliberate breath. The dim glow of the lamp casts a warm amber hue over her weathered face, illuminating the lines that map out decades of pain, resilience, and growth. She pauses, her eyes drifting to the window where the night sky stretches vast and silent, stars shimmering like distant memories she's learned to embrace. Her fingers linger on the cover as if anchoring herself to the act of acceptance she's finally reached. For so long she carried the weight of her childhood, images of her father's violence, her mother's passive neglect, moments when hope seemed just beyond reach. But tonight, something feels different. She whispers softly, "It's okay to let go, to accept what was, and to honor what I've become." Her voice is barely more than a murmur, yet it ripples through the quiet room, a testament to her newfound peace. Tears threaten to surface, but she blinks them away, a faint smile curling at her cracked lips. This journey, her lifelong battle with shadows, has forged her into someone who no longer sees trauma as her defining story, but as a chapter she's learned to close with dignity. She reaches out, feeling the worn pages of her journal where her words have become a mirror of her soul, a testament to her courage. "I am not just a survivor," she whispers again, voice firming with conviction. "I am a woman who fought, who learned to forgive herself, who turned her scars into strength." Her gaze drifts upward, meeting the starlit sky as if connecting with the universe itself. Gentle tears slip down her cheeks, glistening in the soft light. Tears of release, of gratitude, of hope. Her heart swells with understanding that healing isn't an ending but a continuous journey, one she now embraces with open arms. She softly places her journal on the side table, her fingers brushing the worn cover one last time, then leans back into her chair, eyes closed, feeling the quiet hum of peace settle over her. In that moment, she truly accepts her past as an inseparable part of her identity, no longer a source of shame, but a testament to her relentless strength. The shadows of her childhood will always be there, but they no longer define her. Instead, she has chosen to walk into tomorrow, carrying her story with grace and resilience, knowing she has finally come home to herself. Eleanor sat quietly by her window as the golden hues of sunset spilled across the sky, casting a warm glow over her weathered face. Her eyes, bright yet softened by years of reflection, traced the horizon where the sun dipped behind distant hills, a silent witness to her lifetime of scars and victories. In her hand, she held a fragile cup of tea, the steam curling upward like wisps of memories. Some bitter, some sweet. She took a slow breath, feeling the cool evening air seep into her bones, and whispered softly, "I fought so hard to find my voice, to break free from the shadows that haunted me for so long." Her gaze lingered on the silhouette of the trees, swaying gently, as if they too carried stories of resilience within their roots. A faint smile touched her lips. Her fingers brushed the worn edges of her journal, the pages filled with years of pain, hope, and finally, acceptance. She remembered her trembling voice when she finally confided in her granddaughter about her childhood. How she'd told her, "I was a prisoner of silence, but I learned to speak again, even if it took decades." The words had trembled, but they had come out freeing her from the chains that had bound her spirit. Now, as the light faded, she felt a peace that had eluded her for most of her life, an understanding that her suffering, though raw and unyielding, had forged her into the woman she was today. Strength isn't the absence of pain, she mused softly. It's the courage to face it, to carry it, and to transform it into something beautiful. She lifted her eyes to the crimson sky, whispering again, "Tonight I am finally home, inside myself, within my story. The shadows will always be there, but I choose to walk into tomorrow with my head held high, knowing that every scar is a testament to my survival, my resilience, my unwavering spirit." As the last rays of sunlight vanished, Eleanor closed, her eyes briefly, feeling the gentle hum of life's ongoing journey within her. She knew her story was far from over, each new dawn a chance to rebuild, to forgive, and to embrace the strength she had fought so hard to find. With a deep, steadying sigh, she turned away from the window, a quiet smile lingering on her lips.